on the composition of the Bible in the early church, and they don't even include your books.
Well,
And of course, if I want to add Pope Gregory the Great, in the end of the 6th century, Pope Gregory the Great, in his commentary on Job, actually states explicitly that the Maccabees isn't canonical. So is he a Protestant now? Is he Martin Luther?
Maccabees are, as I explained beforehand, are extremely useful in terms of understanding the world into which Jesus is born. And for that reason, if no other, it's worthy of our study. And because it is worthy of our study, it is also worthy of being in the Bible.
Okay, would you say that the works of Josephus, his, let's say, Antiquities of the Jews and his Jewish Wars, they're useful for knowing the time of Jesus and just before the history of Israel and so on and so forth? Would you agree with that?
Well, I think that they're useful, but they're not biblical texts, and they don't purport to be.
Why not? Why not? They're very useful for learning history, and especially the time before and during Christ.
They're not written as part of describing the history of the Jews in the same way that Maccabees are.
How?
Well, look, I mean, I'm not as familiar with all of the details of the writings of Josephus, so I don't want to comment on individual things. My understanding of them is that it's more of a commentary. It's not one that's designed as an attempt to capture the history in the same way that the other ones are.
But it is designed to. How is it different? On what criteria do you say that the way that Maccabees captures history somehow makes it canonical? No reason given, if I'm honest, and yet the way Josephus does history doesn't make him canonical. Where do you get this criteria?
You come to the central question in terms of what makes something canonical. You know, what decides what gets into the Bible, what decides what doesn't get into the Bible, and those things which account the history of the Jewish people, and describe their relationship with God, and the requirements that God is sort of putting on them, is very much worthy of study and understanding. And for those reasons, it gets into the Bible. Josephus is not and does not purport, as I understand it, to be a religious text.
Right, final words. We have to wrap up. Bob.
I don't know. Who'd like to go first? Me or you, Edwin?
You can go first.
Okay, no problem. Well, thank you. This is a good opportunity. I think it was very enlightening, even if it can only be as long as it could be. I think this demonstrates just how massive these topics are, where even on one question alone, there could be an absolute ton of back and forth, a lot of material to go with. But if I'm very honest, I believe I've demonstrated that the Roman Catholic view, at least as how Edwin personally subscribes to it, is not very historically tenable. There has to be, or at least the papacy and, of course, Edwin's view of the church makes very large and, very overarching claims about the nature of the church, that it was all consensus, it was everything, it was the Roman Catholic Church from the very beginning. It entirely agreed with what we consider the Bible. And then, of course, I show some data, and it shows that was simply not the case. And I believe I've shown that both on a logical level and a historical level, at least as a primer, because this discussion, it really only touched the surface of these many issues. I'll be very honest on that. But I believe even with this very surface level start, that exposes some genuine questions, that history, especially church history, is a bit more messy than Roman Catholicism would like to admit, and that logical issues with respect to, for example, whether the apostles or whether the church created the scriptures, or if the scriptures undergird the church. I believe that's been quite exposed as well, since there is an obvious circularity of the apostles being the foundation of the church, and yet the church being the foundation of the very scriptures that the apostles wrote. Honestly, it doesn't really make sense. But look, either way, I believe I've made a pretty decent case here. I doubt anyone's going to be converted by this, and I would hope not, because this is a very simple surface level presentation by myself and Edwin. And either way, I think we both did a pretty decent job at presenting our views. I'll definitely say Edwin is the better speaker. I'm a bit more of how to say it, sometimes ad hoc with my speech, kind of like that professor kind of nerdy character with things like actually this, actually that. A lot of things come out of my mouth because I've got a lot of things to say. But look, either way, I think this is very good, and I believe I've made a good case to show that, at least to start with, that Roman Catholicism and its view of church history is can at least be questioned and should be.
Edwin, final words?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank both the moderators and my opponent for participating in this debate. Before we're Catholics, before we're Protestants, we're Christians first of all. And we should remember that, because those that divide us is minuscule compared to that which unites us. And we both accept the authority of the Bible. We both accept, apparently, that there are other places that we can turn to as places of authority, whether they are our leaders, whether they're our prayer. We both accept the need for the church to be in communion with itself, for members to come together and debate these ideas and try to find some sort of central common ground. We both accept that the Bible has potentially flaws and questions and errors, or issues with it. We both accept that there is both divine will that goes into creating the Bible, and that there's both humans who are going into creating the Bible as well. So there's a real similarity in large sections of it. We both accept the need for churches to have leaders, in order to be powerful in terms of its impact, in terms of changing our lives. In terms of things that I think that I've made that would be quite useful, I'd say that you don't want to get too caught down with saying just Scripture and only Scripture and look nowhere else. And whether you're Catholic or Protestant or wherever you look on that, I think you have to recognise that there are so many other sources of truth in our world, and that we must look to those other sources of truth, not just the Bible within itself, particularly to the extent that the Bible conflicts with science, and particularly to the extent that the Bible conflicts potentially with itself. I think that there is a benefit in the church being in communion, and I think that the real appeal of Catholicism is that of the idea of one church. And if I had my way, all Protestants and Orthodox would come back in and join and be part of the Catholic Christian faith as well, because that's what I see its role is. And maybe the reasons why they left is because we had some bad popes. But I wish that we had better popes who could heal the divide and bring us all back together into one Christian community and one Christian church. And good popes will end up doing that some days. I hope that we've learned a lot about the Bible. I hope that we've learned a lot about each other's faith. I hope that we've had a level of mutual respect for each other. My opponent is extremely knowledgeable and certainly has an eye for detail in terms of history that I can't keep all in my head. But I respect him, and I'd like to thank our listeners. And if you're interested in these topics, and if you're an atheist like I was, reach out to somebody and realize that there are intelligent Christians out there who have thought about these issues deeply, and who might have some answers on issues that you haven't occurred to you yet. I was an atheist for a period of time. And what brought me to Christianity was reason, and realizing that those things that I thought I couldn't have answers to, that there were actually answers. I just needed to look in the right places. Seeking you will find. Knock on the door will be opened. And I think I'll leave it with that.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Edwin, and thank you, Paul Facey. Thank you guys for coming on. I'm sure there'll be a religious discussion at some point in the future. They do tend to be very popular. Next week, our guest will be Stephen Chavura, so please tune in for that. I've been your host, Andrew Kremen, alongside Rory O'Connor, and we will see you next week. Bye.